your angels that you're dealing with don't have these 5 or 6 characteristics I just mentioned, watch out. They might not be the real McCoy. The angels we get in popular culture today are very different. For example, there are more often than not gauzy romantic females. They almost never testify of Yeshua or his gospel except maybe during the Christmas season, and we have Be Kind to God Week, I call it, the one week of the year where they cram in all of these, Christmassy, pseudo-Christian TV shows. And of course we have the annual appearance of the 10 Commandments during Lent. That's the other Be Kind to God week. Otherwise, television doesn't hate to trash him every chance they get. These angels on TV and in the movies only talk of love and mercy, never judgment. And there are spiritual teachers who are training people to get in contact with their angels. Did you know if you go into like a big bookstore, you can find angel tarot decks, you can find angel channeling books, how to channel your own angel and get guidance from your angels. And there are even supposed angels now singing on CDs. Now, wouldn't that be a bestseller, having angels singing on a CD? So, and it gets better and better, folks. You go to Hollywood. Since 1947, which is the year of the flying saucer in Roswell, Hollywood has been promoting a romantic fantasy idea of angels coming down and falling in love with human women. For example, 1947, some of you may remember this, maybe not, you're old enough to have seen it, but to have seen it on TV. The Bishop's Wife, Cary Grant and Loretta Young, where Cary Grant plays a dapper angel. And guess what happens? He falls in love with a human woman. Imagine that. Then in 1987, 40 years later, we have Wings of Desire, which is a European movie, which has an angel fall for a human woman. Then, just so nobody feels left out, we have the movie, same year, 87, Date with an Angel, in which a gorgeous blonde female angel gives up her angelic nature to fall in love with a human male. Then we have the thing you see up there, The Preacher's Wife, which is basically a remake of The Bishop's Wife. And in this case, we have the handsome Denzel Washington, who everybody is like, yeah, he's really good looking. Probably better looking than Cary Grant, in fact. And he nearly breaks up a preacher's marriage because he's, having thoughts about the preacher's wife and actually courts her because the preacher is too busy being a preacher. Then we have Prophecy 2 in 1998. Here, a good angel assumes human form and to sire a child by a mortal woman to save humanity from the fallen archangel Gabriel's evil plans. Excuse me, chapter and verse on that one. And then most recently, as far as I know, The City of Angels in 1998, which is a remake of Wings of Desire. Notice how Hollywood has so few new ideas, with high-octane stars like Meg Ryan and Nicolas Cage. And all of these are, what are they doing? They're promoting the idea of, human women are so sexy and so beautiful that if an angel comes down here, he's just going to trip all over his wings and harp and fall head over heels for this woman. Is this just Hollywood being romantic, or is there a more sinister agenda here? Well, Yeshua warned us in Luke 17, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Well, we're definitely in the last times, amen? I mean, Hebrews 1:2 says we were in the last times back when Hebrews was written. So the only sin, as I mentioned, specifically mentioned in Genesis 6, is this intermingling of fallen angels with human women. Thus, it's only natural that beginning right after the Roswell incident, Hollywood would start acclimating us to the romantic possibilities for ladies to have affairs with angels. Of course, angels would always treat you better. In all of these movies, the angels are much better at courting women. Of course, they're sexier, and they just do things that no human male can do, So what woman wouldn't fall in love with an angel? Especially if it looks like Denzel Washington, Anyway, from the Bible, a few further points need to be explained. Angels, and I already touched on this, in their natural condition cannot procreate with humans. That relates to Matthew 22:30. Angels have glorified human bodies of flesh and bone. They're very much like what we will be in the resurrection. Okay? So therefore, that's why an angel cannot possess a person. Only a demon can possess a person. Because you can't get two bodies in here. There's only room for one physical body within this shape. Okay. Now, an interesting thing here. Adam and Eve may not have originally had blood in their veins. You ever think about that? Notice what Adam says to Eve. He says, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Nothing about blood. And some Bible commentators believe, and as do I, that the fruit that Adam ate and Eve ate was a grape. And then when they ate that forbidden fruit, it transformed them somehow. It changed their DNA, and they got whatever used to be in their bodies. And some people believe it was actually light, the light of Yahweh that flowed through every vein in their body, and that's where they lived forever. And that's what we're going to be in the resurrection. Because remember what it says? It says flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. So when we're in heaven, even as a resurrected being in the end of time, we're not going to have blood in our veins. We're going to have something altogether more wonderful. So anyway, something happened to them, and blood flowed into their veins, and with it came mortality. Okay. Now it's interesting, this use of the grape, because you know the grape has this kind of interesting ambivalence in Scripture. On the one hand, it's used in the Passover. You know, Yeshua used it in the Last Supper, the fruit of the vine. But yet on the other hand, if you want to be a really righteous, on-fire Israelite and take a Nazarene vow, you're not allowed to touch anything of the grape. Not even raisins, not grapes, not wine, not grape juice, not anything. I'd also point out the fact that there's some miracles that happen that kind of direct our attention in this way. Just as a for instance, the turning of the Red Sea into blood, the turning of water into wine at the wedding at Cana by Yeshua. You know, those are two examples where there's this strange relationship between a clear, pure liquid versus blood/wine. Now, in order... Let's see. Let me go back. In order for these angels to be able to reproduce, what they have to do is drink human blood. And that's where it gets pretty gross, because, of course, this is something Yahweh forbids throughout the entire Bible. In doing so, they would lose much of their angelic power, but probably not their angelic intellect, which is truly formidable. This is additionally the origin of the vampire cult from Eastern Europe, which has been with us since the dawn of time. And this is interesting too, because ancient legends tell us that supposedly the place where these B'nai Elohim first came down was in Sidon, which is a region in the Holy Land area. And then they went north into what today would be the Balkans, Hungary, Romania, places like that. And that's where they actually settled. And this is the place where the vampire legends come, the idea of these supernatural beings that drink blood and live forever. Well, what if these supernatural beings that drink blood and live forever aren't dead humans? What if they're fallen angels instead? But that's a whole other talk. This is also why Yahweh forbade the drinking of blood, because as he says, the blood is the life is in the blood. And it's a great curse to drink blood. The children that they had would have been superhuman men of renown because of the angelic side of their nature. But their sin was so grievous that Yahweh drowned the entire world to keep this from proliferating. Some might say, well, this happened a long time ago. This happened, millennia ago. It isn't around today. There's not giants walking around today. Well, that isn't really true. After the flood, the scriptures still freely speak of giants. Goliath, of course, is the best known example. Everybody knows about Goliath. And we've already mentioned the Anakim, the Rephaim, all these different races that were in the promised land, and they had to go in there. Why do you think the spies that Moses sent into the land, they came back and they were all wimpy and they said, well, they're big and we're like grasshoppers next to them. Well, that was probably a slight contradiction. But yet, I have seen pictures of unearthed skeletons from that region of the earth where there's a thigh bone that's more than 10 feet long. Now, you figure, okay, my thigh bone's probably about 2.5 feet long. So if you kind of extrapolate that, you're talking about somebody that makes Goliath look like a midget. Just enormous beings. Finally, there's the verse we already mentioned in the New Testament where Paul cautions about women and angels, how women should keep their heads covered for the sake of the angels. If the angels are no longer being tempted after Calvary, why bring this up? Then the final point on this is, notice what it says in Genesis 6:4. Then there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. So that's very clearly stating by the author, who I believe was Moses, that even after the flood, there were still occasionally giants running around. These fallen angels are still around today, I believe, using their minds to make up for their lost angelic abilities. Because remember, in the old days, before they fell, these angels just go boing, boing like this and cross the universe. They could leave the throne of the Almighty, which is billions of light years from here, and instantly be here on earth. They had to give all that up when they fell. They are still driven by Satan to interbreed with human beings, but at the same time they've used their intellect to create literal machines, spaceships, that are capable of centuries ahead of human technology. They use their technology to blackmail the government into allowing them to misuse human citizens as they see fit. Their hope is to produce a child who will be the Antichrist, and or to produce thousands of people who are programmed to obey him because of abduction experiences. And, okay, we did that. Many people who have these abduction experiences crave them. They become addicted to them, even though they're scary. Even though, I mean, how would you like to be strapped to a table, unable to move, and having people sticking probes up your ears and stuff? I mean, anybody want to sign up for that one? But some people want it. I've actually talked to people that I say they are praying for it, to be abducted, because now these aren't Christians, of course, but they believe it's the next step in the evolution of human consciousness. To go through these, what these experiments are, the aliens are doing, the space brothers, pardon me, are doing are to help us evolve into the next stage of human evolution. This seems to be the theme that this Whitley Strieber has that wrote the book Communion. And he's done so much to popularize the abduction phenomenon. They're trying to deceive people into believing that they are indeed benevolent. And a lot of people are buying it. And I don't know how many of you have seen that movie Independence Day, you know, but there's that one scene that so reminds me of this, where at the beginning of the movie where there's all these wacko people up on top of this skyscraper, there's this enormous UFO that's like bigger than Yankee Stadium right over them, and they're standing there saying, "Beam me up, take me," you know, and then this big death ray comes down and, you know, blows up 5 city blocks. You know, I mean, that's so typical of the mentality of these people. The other thing is, now think about this one for a moment. Suppose I came up to just a typical person on the street, not a Christian, just some typical unsaved individual, and said, "Hey, I got a great deal for you. How'd you like to have a demon live inside of you?" Most people, I think, would probably say, "Get out of here." You know, even if they don't believe in God, even if they don't believe in, I don't want any demons, you know, that sounds too crazy, you know, whatever. But suppose this. Suppose I come up to someone like that and I say, "How would you like to have a vast, superior alien intelligence cohabit with you and live with you and talk to you and teach you the wonders of the universe?" There's a lot of people who would sign up for that. You know, it sounds pretty good, unless you know your Bible. And this is a phenomenon that's known as walk-ins. There's thousands of people walking around that claim that they have an alien living inside of them, an alien consciousness. I don't think it's literally an alien in the sense that they have like some, you know, like what is it, there's a Stargate thing where they have this worm parasite thing living inside of them that's like an alien. No, not quite like that. This is like demon possession. except it isn't called that. It's been repackaged with Star Trek sci-fi, glitter, and instead they've got this, it's like having Mr. Spock live inside of me, except no pointy ears, So, I mean, the devil is so clever about this. The world is being prepared for this end times deception, and I believe it will involve Jupiter or Orion or both. I would not be surprised if these beings claim to come from Jupiter. That's because in ancient times the planet Jupiter was called Marduk, and both Marduk and Orion are associated with Nimrod, and of course Nimrod is the fountainhead of all false religion on this planet. He's the one that started Babylon. And the other thing too is that Jupiter is the name of the king of the gods. Jove, Zeus, whatever you want to use, whatever term you want to use. And so he is a rival deity to Yahweh. So why wouldn't these beings come from that planet? Now, most Bible students know that Nimrod was the original head of the New World Order back in the days of Babel, and he is the #1 type of Antichrist in the whole Old Testament. So, works for me. Now we have the whole abduction phenomenon. The first reported abduction was in 1961. There may have been others before that, but this is the only one we know about. This couple, normal, average people, he was a postal worker, she was a housewife. He's now since deceased, but I think Betty Hill's still alive. This is Barney and Betty Hill. And they went out for a drive, and they saw a light in the sky, and all of a sudden their engine stopped and they lost 2 hours. The next thing they knew, it was 2 hours later. And they didn't know what was going on, but they both seemed kind of weirded out and creeped out by the experience. So much so that after, I don't know how long, months, maybe even years, they sought out the help of a hypnotist. And he hypnotized them. And the interesting thing is that they started speaking of the things we've discussed earlier, the idea of being taken aboard this craft by these little gray people that look very weird and spindly and have enormous almond-shaped eyes. Beings that are very terrifying, and that you're strapped down and they're doing medical experiments. They're like taking stuff, out of your body. They're putting probes in your nose and in your ears and, just nasty things altogether. And the interesting thing, the thing that really stunned everybody later on, is that Betty claims while she was on this table, she saw a star chart. And what's interesting is that in this star chart, she said there was XYZ stars. And astronomers looked at that chart and said, well, this doesn't mean anything. Well, 20 or 30 years after this, they have the computer ability now to model constellations, and they said by using that software, they were able to turn it around and determine that this is what Earth would look like, the star system of Sol, our solar system, if it was seen from the star system Zeta Reticuli. Now that's kind of amazing. So anyhow, this has been a pretty reputable story that's never really been shaken. Essentially, this is how it goes. This is the abduction scenario. People are accosted by aliens, usually in either a deserted area outside or else in their bedrooms. They can't move. They're paralyzed. They feel as though someone is levitating them out of the room, or else little people are carrying them out of the room or whatever, and they're taken up to this, attacked by demons. Nothing could be done. Pastors, ministers, psychiatrists, nothing worked. We came, and the senior guy who was in our group at that time, who really was very, very moving in the gifts of the Spirit, he was led to walk around the room, and he found this lady had a spoon collection. And one of the spoons had a little tiny demon face on it. He threw the spoon out the window, and the kid was instantly set free. That's an example of an open door. Where it's relatively benign. It's not like you're deliberately doing something nasty. I mean, nobody would have even thought of that, But yet the Lord pointed in that direction. So that's one possibility. But we must remember that bad stuff can happen to good Christians. They might be robbed, murdered, or persecuted and still be righteous. They can be injured and killed in natural disasters. I'm sure there were some Christians that were killed in Katrina I'm sure there were, there were Christians that were killed in the tornadoes that hit in Indiana a few days ago. Just because we're Christians, that doesn't mean we're bulletproof. So if that's true of natural disasters, why shouldn't it be true of something like this? Remember that these abductions are often a physical phenomenon. Some may be spiritual in nature. They're a deception. But some are undeniably physical. They leave behind marks on the body. The evidence is found in the home. By that I mean there might be scuff marks on a windowsill or an open door or little wet, weird-looking footprints going from the window to the bed. Imagine waking up in the morning and finding out that your entire lower body is wet and full of grass and stuff. You didn't even think you left your bed, and you look down on the floor and there's these little strange footprints that look like nothing you've ever seen in your life. It would tend to creep you out, don't you think? Also, sometimes implants are found. We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. Then finally, third parties sometimes witness the abduction. I was talking to a very solid Baptist preacher I know. He's pastor of a big church, and he said he was out ministering to someone, sick call type thing, and he was driving through this neighborhood where it happened another one of his congregation members lived, and he saw this UFO hovering about 200 feet away from the house, and he actually saw the window open and a body floating out the window, going right up through the air, just that slow, and going into the UFO. And this guy was stone sober. I mean, Baptists aren't into drinking, amen? So, and this guy has an impeccable reputation. I don't think he'd ever, and then later on, the congregation members said they had had weird nightmares and had woken up with all these strange marks on their bodies, bruises they didn't know where they came from, had nosebleeds, and eventually an implant came out of the nose. Now, what are these implants? Well, they can be any number of things. They can be little metallic beads. They can be little cylinders. They can be almost organic looking. They're usually very, very tiny. They're much tinier. You've all, I'm sure, seen these things about these RFID chips and, embedded chips and all of that where they're pretty small, but these things are much smaller. And what we tell people to do is pray and ask the Holy Spirit to remove these things, either by destroying them or by having the body expel them. And in most cases, either the person wakes up, there's blood on the pillow, and there's this little tiny thing there, either metallic or of indeterminate origin, or it emerges out of their body like they get this weird sore or welt somewhere, and then the next couple of days out comes this strange-looking thing. And this is an actual implant that was recovered. Now, you don't do it, oddly enough, we actually went to a biology department at a local college and got this blown up, because actually it's smaller than a sesame seed. And the first thing I thought was, it looks like a chicken McNugget. But what's funny is, and I don't know if you can even see this on the screen, but up in the upper left, there are a couple of little black things. Now, this implant is 20 years old. It came out of a Christian 20 years ago. There's two little black things, and those little black things were originally, they had little tentacles coming out of them, little kind of feeler thingies, and those broke off over the years. Because they were very, very tiny, and I'm sure once this thing was out of the body, it kind of, dried up like any organism would. But I asked the guy at the I said, what is this? And he said, bleeped if I know. That was his candid answer. He says, I've never seen anything like this. He magnified it even further. He said, it's not a seed. It appears to be a biological thing, but yet it's not. So, anyhow, that's a real live implant. I tried to find another one, but we're in the process of repacking stuff and I couldn't locate it. But this is one of two that we actually have. Now, back to the question. Am I an abductee? Well, first of all, Some of you may have heard this, but I'll say it again. We had the thing where I was studying with the Arch Druid, the Grand Master Druid of North America down in Arkansas. Sharon and I were down there, and every night we'd be on the mountaintop sitting at a picnic table learning all these weird things about how to, be a druid. And about half the nights we were there, especially it was clear, this UFO would come sailing in, quiet as can be, and hover over the mountaintop for the entire class. And it was like 200 feet above us. I mean, I could actually look up, and so could the other people, and see windows in the thing. And sometimes we'd see little weird figures walking around in those windows, and sometimes they'd even go like this, And then when the class was over, just as silent as a whisper, it would, glide away. And it wasn't like a dirigible or something, because we could see the stars beyond it. It was sort of basically cigar-shaped. And, this druid who was teaching us would never say what it was. He wouldn't comment on it. We'd talk about it among ourselves, but none of us had the nerve to ask him because he wouldn't say anything. And then there's the time in Wauwatosa a few years later when I was told by my spirit guides to go out in the middle of January at midnight when it was like 20 below zero and walk through this park by the Menominee River, I think it was. And I walked there, and this brilliantly colored oval thing came down out of the sky. It looked like a thing of pure light. And it came like within 100 feet of me, and then all of a sudden it just like that enveloped me. And the next thing I know, I was inside of this thing. But this wasn't your typical abduction experience by any means. I was standing there before like this panel of 5 or 6 somethings. I mean, some of them looked perfectly human. They said they had kind of strange robes on, but some of them looked very non-human. And the odd thing is that they started asking me questions. And they were mainly asking me questions about masonry. Now, isn't that interesting? And they wanted to know how well I knew the Masonic catechism I'd been taught. And so I actually had to give this back and forth thing that Masons are required to learn before they go up to the next level of the lodge. And then, at the end of it, there was no further comment. The next thing I know, I'm laying on my back in the snow in this park in Wauwatosa, and it's about an hour and a half later. And I was just a little bit cold, so I knew I hadn't been laying there the whole time, or I would have been half frozen. Then the other thing is I was drawn so quickly and so deeply into Enochian and Thelemic magic. And these are 2 very advanced kinds of magic that involve, how shall I put this, transspatial relationships where you are opening up doorways into other dimensions and you're inviting beings from other dimensions through. And some of these beings were pretty scary. All I can tell you is one time my wife and I and some of our coven members, we went down to the shores of Lake Michigan in the middle of the night when the moon was full, and we did a call to Cthulhu. Now, ship. Sometimes they don't even see the ship. Sometimes they just wake up and they're in the ship. And the ship usually is very hard to describe. It has no configurations that are easy to put into words. And they're usually strapped down on a table, and experiments are being done to them of a very invasive nature. Blood and other bodily fluids are being extracted from them. There's often an excessive interest in the UFO crew in their reproductive organs. If they're women, sometimes they harvest ova from them. If they're men, they take seminal fluid from them. The person often reports being stored somewhere in a hive-like compartment, sometimes for days on end. The crew communicates with the person with something like telepathy. Often tiny devices are inserted in the person's body. Ears or nasal passages are the most common places. The person is usually abandoned by the crew at or near their place of abduction with their memory wiped clean. The person may not have any conscious knowledge of this until months or years later. But they have unexplained scars, memory flashes, nightmares, etc. Some women report hysterical pregnancies. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's where a woman has all the manifestations of pregnancy, but no baby comes out. And some people believe that's because they actually put They impregnate these women either through artificial insemination or whatever, and then when the baby is about to come to term, they beam the baby out. So there's no, there's no trace of either a cesarean section or a normal, vaginal delivery. Other women have carried children to term. This happened to one person we prayed for. She had the baby. They said, oh, it's stillborn, and they whisked it out of the room. They never let her see it. That was on a military hospital in Germany, by the way. This stuff often is related to people who are in the military or their children, children of military people. None of these women had any conscious knowledge of who the father could be. Many of them, in fact, thought they were still virgins. Once these people came forward in the story, they often found themselves followed or hassled by the dread men in black in their ancient black Cadillacs. These are very strange-looking creatures. They appear to be human, except they look Asian, and they smell like sulfur or ozone. They wear dark glasses, black suits, and Homburg hats. And they talk with a kind of strange metallic quality. And they often threaten people who are talking about UFOs. They tell them you'll lose your job, you'll be ridiculed, the government will come and take you away, whatever it might be. And they drive off in their Cadillacs, which are invariably reported to be absolutely silent. Even though they look like a 1958 Caddy, they don't make any noise, just like that, What is the physical appearance of these beings? Well, I've already alluded to this first kind. This is the supposed gray alien, which come, they say, from Zeta Reticuli. And these are really disgusting little creatures. They run from 3 to 4 feet tall. They smell like sulfur or feces. They walk kind of monkey-like. They don't seem to have any speech. They communicate entirely by telepathy. They don't have any, they often are running around without clothes on. Or if they wear clothes, they wear kind of a skin-tight silver lame jumpsuit. And you know what the insignia they wear is it? On it, it's like a staff with a serpent on it. Isn't that interesting? So anyway, they normally don't appear to have any external genitalia, nor do they appear to eat. Reports we've had is that they've been seen, they have like these big pools of blood, like a big vat of blood or a big vat of some green stuff like chlorophyll, and they stick their fingers in it and, see, Mork isn't the only one that eats like that. You see, where do they get this stuff? They put this stuff on TV, but, these are the ones that are also most commonly seen in abductions. They're the ones that are doing all of the legwork. The second kind of alien. These are known as the Nordics, the blondes, or the gods from outer space. And these look idealized blonde humans. Very, very beautiful, very, very handsome, taller than normal, but not like gigantically tall. And they are supposedly from the constellation Lyra. And they are said to be from Space Command. And they're the good guys. They're here to help us, protect us from the little gray guys. This is the story out there in UFO land. The problem is that the prime directive doesn't allow them to help us, really. They can just sort of stand around and give us advice, but they can't really do anything. So, okay. Anyway, but you never see them typically involved in abduction scenarios. Quite often, they're the ones that actually walk around in broad daylight and appear quite normal, except they unfortunately tend to wear silver lame jumpsuits, which sort of makes them stand out a little. But otherwise, they look perfectly human. In fact, they look too perfectly human. Then we have the dread men in black. I've already kind of described these, so I'm not going to go into it. But I just want to tell you that they don't look like Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. The movies those movies are based on a comic book. And, there's just tiny shreds of truth, but most of it is just, total comedy for the sake of, the movie-going public. But again, this is intended to acclimate people, to familiarize people, So if you see someone coming up to you, dressed like that, you're, oh, wow, cool, it's Will Smith, whatever. Then we have the reptilians. These supposedly come from the constellation Draco. And as some of you may know, Draco is the Latin word for dragon. It's the dragon that's in the heavens. These are carnivorous, cannibalistic, and 7 feet tall. They exist at the top of the alien food chain. They like to eat people. The tenderer, the better. They also will eat other aliens if they're hungry and the mood strikes them. These are very, very cruel and very, very nasty, but supposedly they are the administrators. They are the people running things behind the show, and they have been recently cited, and by recently I'm relatively like the last 20 or 30 years, by numerous people, myself included, and they're not something you'd want to run into in a dark alley. And again, some of you may remember the old TV miniseries V, where they had these huge ships, coming down, and what happened? They looked just like us, except they wore these funny red jumpsuits, but ultimately you discover they were wearing masks. They take off the masks, and they're lizards that like to eat live mice, at least. Now, the big question everybody wants to know is this: can believers be abducted? Well, in my opinion, the answer would be a qualified yes. Many believers have reported being assaulted in their homes by aliens and repelling them by using the name of Yeshua. By the way, we prefer to use Yeshua just because that's his real Hebrew name. Nobody, when he walked the earth, called him Jesus. The angel that came to Mary did not say, and you shall call his name Jesus. His name is Yeshua, which is neat because it means Yah, which is the name of the Almighty Father, saves. Or Yah is salvation, depending on how you translate it. So it's a wonderful name. We prefer to use that. Anyway, others say they have used the divine name to no effect and were still abducted. And both of these people were solid believers. Now that's interesting. What do you do with that information? Oops. Here's what I think. I think the fact of the matter is it does not have to do anything with the goodliness of the person. Open doors might be an issue in some cases, and by open doors I don't mean they left their front door open. I mean, those of us that deal in liberation or deliverance type ministries understand that there are certain things that could be like either a sinful lifestyle or maybe even something in the home. Like, for example, we had this one case where a family's daughter was being horribly